Okay, that's us starting now.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Jackie Duncan. I am the Qualities Professional Advisor at the Care Inspectorate. Next slide, please. Today's speakers are Stacey Webster from Head of Services from LGBT Health and Wellbeing. I'm also joined by Celeste Bertrou, Evidence and Influencing Coordinator, Care Experience Young People Programme from Life Changes Trust. Doreen Watson, Service Manager, Early Learning and Childcare from the Care Inspectorate, and Alan Barker, Adult Inspector and Chair of the LGBT Chapter Champion Group at the Care Inspectorate. I'm also assisted by Stephen Dent and Patricia Smith in the background. Next slide, please, Patricia. So we have a really full and interesting agenda for today, and my role as the main facilitator is really to set the scene for our other speakers and share some key themes from today. So I'm going to start just by acknowledging that there's still some significant inequalities and barriers faced by the LGBT community, despite the Equality Act that offers protection on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender reassignment, and also human rights legislation. However, today we're going to talk about equality, diversity and inclusion as a tool for quality improvement support, and we're also going to have a reminder of the health and social care standards. We're also going to talk about promoting LGBT inclusion within care services to make care settings a place of safety and security, and the importance of making LGBT visible so that people feel valued. We'll also talk about how LGBT can intersect with other parts of an individual's identity. And you'll leave today with some practical resources to help you. We will have 5 minutes for questions at the end, so I'd encourage you to use the speech bubble within the chat to ask any questions. There's also still time to register for some conversation cafes that are taking place later this afternoon and tomorrow, if you're interested. Next slide, please, Patricia. So there's some statistics on the slide that sets the context around Scotland's population, and this was updated in January of this year. And this is from the Scottish Government's Equality Finder page that says that around 3% of Scottish adults self-identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual or other, and half of those identifying were aged under 35. 10% were aged 65 and over, and there's an estimate that between 0.6% and 1% of the population were trans. Next slide, please, Patricia. On the slide in front of us, there is a summary of some of the challenges for coming out or being out in a care setting for children and young people. And Celeste is going to talk about this a little bit more. However, I thought it was important to acknowledge that this is the year of childhood, and this is the year that the UNCRC is being implemented into Scots law. And there's 3 articles that are most relevant here to children's rights. That children and young people have the right to protection against discrimination, that children and young people have the right to an opinion and for it to be listened to and taken seriously. And for Article 16, that children and young people have the right to a private life. I think it's really important as well when you look at the diagram that you'll see some of the fears and anxieties for some LGBT young people about feelings of feeling unsafe, fears of being outed and concerns over information being shared and concerns over privacy. It's also important to say that being LGBT is not a child protection issue. Next slide, please, Patricia. There's also challenges for coming out or being out in a care setting for adults and older people. Research demonstrates that LGBT people in later life report poorer health than the general population. There's also a tendency for people to make assumptions and think in a heteronormative way, which basically means that some of us still think that relationships are still husbands and wife, when actually families and relationships can be more diverse. Many older LGBT people fear that they will have to access social care that is not LGBT affirmative, leaving them vulnerable and isolated, and even feeling that they must go back into the closet and hide parts of their identity. Next slide, please. For those who are LGBT, the move to a care home can be influenced by worries about being placed into a community that they don't identify with. It could mean feeling that their friends or partners might not be welcomed, and even feeling that they can't display photos of loved ones or people that they care about within their home. Basically feeling that maybe person-centred care is not possible for them. The LGBT Foundation found that 59.4% of trans people in Manchester felt that not being able to access appropriate care that is trans-friendly was a concern for care in later life. Next slide, please. Here's the summary from the Care Inspectorate's corporate plan, and I thought it was important to show our vision. So the Care Inspectorate's vision is for world-class social care and social work in Scotland, where every person in every community experiences high quality care and support that is tailored to the rights, needs and wishes of individuals. We have 3 strategic outcomes. People experience high quality care. People experience positive outcomes. Next slide, please. And people's rights are respected. We also have 7 key principles to help us achieve these strategic outcomes. And the final one on the bullet list is diversity and equality. And we've recently launched our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy in April of this year. We also have summarised our values as well, which are person-centred, fairness, respect, integrity and efficiency. And we believe that this will help us towards world-class care. Next slide, please. I've included a model of person-centred care, and I'm sure you're familiar with many models. This is the one that I have chosen because I think it summarises the themes of today really well. Obviously, we have the person with the health or social care as centre, and it's really emphasising that we need to see it from their perspective. We have human rights are promoted, but I think it's really important to say that equality, diversity and inclusion is a theme here. We also note that it's a whole system approach that's needed, and there's many organisations and individuals that are involved here, including people working in services and family and friends. And we really need to be joined up here if people are going to have equally good experiences, equity in outcomes and equity in access. Next slide, please. Just a recap on the health and social care standards and the 5 principles that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Obviously, dignity and respect, compassion, being included, responsive care and support and wellbeing are really important here. Next slide, please. There's also the 5 general standards, and the one that I'm going to highlight here is that I experience high quality care and support that is right for me. And I would invite you to think about it from a person who is choosing a service. It's all about choice and control here. I'd also invite you to think about it from a person who's using a service. So here we're talking more about not just discrimination, victimisation and harassment here. We're talking about, are they open to be themselves? Are they unconditionally accepted? Do they feel included, like they belong? Are they welcomed and are they celebrated? Next slide, please. And you'll recognise in the speech bubble this from the standards as well. I am accepted and valued, whatever my needs, ability, gender, age, faith, mental health status, race, background or sexual orientation. I am me, you are you. And the question here is, will you celebrate and support all the bits of me? And we've put 2 examples here, and it's interesting to know what you see. And we've put some words in bold. And this is what we think that many people will see, the parts that are maybe more visible than others. 80-year-old lives with vascular dementia. That might be what you see. You might see the health need before other needs, but she is also a woman. She is a lesbian. She is white, and she lives in an affluent area of Edinburgh. And these are all her experiences, and she will have different needs. And the second example is a 17-year-old man who is gay. He's black, he's Muslim, and he lives in a socially deprived area of Glasgow. He's also deaf and a wheelchair user. So how do you see needs is the question. So person-centred care means acknowledging all of an individual's life experiences and appreciating that they do differ depending on an individual's experiences, needs and interests. So even within communities, experience is varied. I think it's important to acknowledge that depending on someone's experiences, sometimes the different layers of identity can result in multiple discrimination as well. But the best way to find out what someone needs is to look at the whole person, to have a holistic approach and actually ask the person. Next slide, please. And we promised that we'd leave with some practical tips for creating safe environments for LGBT people. Here's a summary of some good practice. I don't plan on going into this on this slide, but you will have a copy of the slides that will be shared with you, as well as a copy of the Q&A, and others will be touching on these in their presentations. But just to say that this can be applied to anyone and from anyone from different communities. So I'll pass you over now to Stacey from LGBT Health and Wellbeing. Thank you.
Great, thanks Jackie. Thanks Jackie. Good morning everybody. As Jackie's already said, my name is Stacey Webster and I'm Head of Services with LGBT Health and Wellbeing. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you this morning. Next slide please. So I thought I would start off just by giving you a brief introduction to the organisation and where some people will be aware of the work that we do, but just to run over if you're not familiar with us. So first and foremost, LGBT Health and Wellbeing is a service delivery organisation delivering services across the Central Belt in Scotland and also nationally. In an average year, we deliver around 300 events to the LGBT community, and we have around 5,000 people that access those groups and events. And we also offer one-to-one support to around 1,000 people in an average year. Since lockdown, which obviously hasn't been an average year, we've continued to deliver our services online, be it with all the challenges that entails. As a community development organisation, this gives us a really wide and extensive reach into the LGBT community, and we're really keen that we can help people gain a voice and influence LGBT inclusion across a whole range of services. And certainly we have active community members that are really keen to be able to participate and do that. This engagement with our community also helps inform and develop our wider capacity building project and work. On the presentation, I've also highlighted that we also operate a national helpline, and although that's there primarily to support our community and also take calls from friends and family members, just to also point out, it's also a really useful resource for people working in the sector, so that please do share this. It is also a resource for signposting and a lot of the other resources that we have. So just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. Next slide, please. So specifically talking about the LGBT project, this was a project that we delivered across 2 years. It was a national project. I'll come on and talk a bit about the toolkit obviously in a moment, but just also to say that I'll be participating in the Conversation Cafe tomorrow afternoon, which will hopefully also enable some fuller conversations to take place in more detail about the development of the toolkit and its use, and hopefully to stimulate some ideas and sort of good practice sharing within that forum. So the project itself was funded by the Life Changes Trust, and it was very much built on the conversations that we had been having with community members over a number of years, especially those who access our LGBT Age project, which works with LGBT people over 50. The project was very much developed with engagement with community members and also a range of stakeholders, including the Care Inspectorate, Alzheimer's Scotland, Scottish Care, and a number of care providers such as Hillcrest, who also piloted the very early versions of the toolkit. Next slide, please. So an obvious starting point, and again, picking up on some of the issues that Jackie has already highlighted in her presentation, I guess a starting point is, why do we need a toolkit? There's still very limited knowledge and understanding of how LGBT people are affected by dementia, often due to the historical invisibility of older LGBT people in dementia and care services. We know that many LGBT people may be unwilling to express their identity or be out to support services and care settings, due in part to previous poor or indeed hostile environments. In Scotland today, unfortunately, significant numbers of LGBT people continue to face prejudice and discrimination, although it is getting better, let's be positive. And many still report poor experiences of engagement to us. This inevitably means that for this group, societal and healthcare attitudes can be a really significant barrier to seeking help and getting timely diagnosis and appropriate support. What we have found is, when somebody develops dementia and starts to need support, they or their partner carer may fear prejudice from professionals getting involved in their life. They may not feel safe to be open about their identity or their life story. And that then contributes to being unwilling or not keen to accept support in their life. We know that many older LGBT people are significantly more likely to require support and reside in residential care homes, as they're more likely to be single, live alone, and not have children to call upon as well. And we know that older LGBT people are more likely to feel lonely and experience social isolation. Dementia, as we know, itself also increases isolation. So LGBT people with dementia may even feel even more lonely and excluded. In many care settings, LGBT people's identities are often hidden, and this is perhaps also more likely in dementia care, where people may become less able to communicate, which is important to them. So this resource will help you consider how LGBT people may not be visible, and the potential consequences for people you support, and the ways to develop more inclusive practice. Next slide, please. So moving on to talk about the toolkit in detail. On this slide, there's a link to the toolkit, which is available to download on our website. So the toolkit itself, it outlines the historical situation of older LGBT people and the ongoing impact that many people face in terms of that historical pathologising of their identity, as well as some of the key issues to consider in relation to LGBT people affected by dementia and LGBT carers, such as access to services, language, assumptions, the degree to which individuals are out, and also how they might want to involve others, particularly their family of choice. The toolkit also talks about what practical and cultural barriers LGBT people might experience when accessing services and how these can be addressed. Whilst all services would aim to be person-centred, it also looks at how to maximise choice and control for people, including issues around disclosure of personal information. Underpinning the toolkit, we also look at what values, ethos and culture needs to be fostered. Again, picking up on some of the comments that Jackie's already made. Basically to enable LGBT people to feel comfortable to be truly themselves when engaging with a service. It takes you through how to create safe spaces that are physically and emotionally safe, comfortable and free from judgment. And the toolkit is very much developed with input from LGBT people using services and also LGBT carers. The project itself and the development of the toolkit was very much guided by a steering group of professionals working in the dementia sector. And we were delighted that the Care Inspectorate got on board really early with the work. The development of the toolkit came about from, we also delivered some open call training to people, and we engaged with people in about 23 organisations. And we also delivered bespoke training to around 150 people. And I suppose these sessions were very much helpful in informing the eventual content within the toolkit. Next slide, please. So the format of the toolkit, it's quite a meaty document, but hopefully it's also quite accessible in that it'll help people to upskill on the issues as well as examine the practical steps that can be taken to create an inclusive service. It contains lots of background information, case studies and links to films. In particular, I'd like to highlight a film that is on our website that people might be interested in looking at called Return to the Closet. It's a community-led film where older LGBT people speak about their thoughts, fears, hopes about the future and about care. It's about 14 minutes long and it was developed by LGBT Health and Illuminate. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. Going back to the toolkit, hopefully it is a tool that teams and organisations can use as a way of starting conversations. That's really a critical bit. Very much the audit tool itself within the toolkit is about creating opportunities for people to talk about practice, share their ideas, share thoughts, as well as looking at how those link to the health and social care standards. So it's very much about, it's very much about stimulating conversation. So to conclude, we're all continuing to learn about what makes a difference to people using services, and we know that creating often small changes can have a massive effect on people. So I would really encourage you to have a look at the toolkit, and hopefully it will give you the opportunity to think about your identifying and celebrating your positive practice as well as areas that you may wish to continue to look at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacey. If we can move on now to Celeste, thanks.
Sorry, you're on mute, Celeste.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to Stacey. I actually just want to reiterate, I've been lucky enough to see that toolkit that was just being discussed, and I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a really wonderful piece of work. Thank you to Jackie and the Care Inspectorate for setting up today's webinar and inviting us to be here today. My name is Celeste Berteau, and I'm an Evidence and Influencing Coordinator with the Life Changes Trust. And I'm here today to introduce you to the LGBT Care Experienced Youth Commission. So first, a little context. The Life Changes Trust is an independent, time-limited trust set up in 2013 by the National Lottery Community Fund. We use our funding to create sustainable and transformational change for 3 beneficiary groups: people affected by dementia, the unpaid carers of people affected by dementia, and young people with experience of the care system. I'm here today representing the Young People with Care Experience program. So in 2018, we launched our Rights and Equalities Funding Initiative, which was designed to support projects which target young people with care experience who may face additional barriers due to protected characteristics, or experience of things like youth justice, homelessness, or mental ill health. One of these grants was awarded to LGBT Youth Scotland. LGBT Youth Scotland set up, developed, and implemented a new Care Experienced Youth Commission focused on the needs and experiences of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender young people with care experience. Their hope was that this commission would allow LGBT young people's views to be listened to and reflected in recommendations and meaningful service change throughout the sector. At Life Changes Trust, we believe in the power of the voices of those with lived experience. Their voices and stories must be central to any changes that we make to policy and practice. While members of the Youth Commission were unfortunately unable to attend today, we wanted you to hear directly from them through a powerful film that they created. The film explores some of their experiences and the results of research they carried out with other LGBT youth with experience of care. It ends with a series of explicit asks for professionals and policymakers. So if we can move to the next slide. And without further ado, the LGBT Care Experience Youth Commission.
The Youth Commission is a group of young people who are LGBT and care experience who come together to help influence change for care experienced LGBT people.
The Youth Commission is a commission by LGBT Youth Scotland, and it's for people who are care experienced that are aged between 13 and 25.
Being on a youth commission involves talking to young people about their views on a certain topic and what needs to change, and then taking that information to professionals and policymakers in the form of training / a resource. Also, there are many networking events.
A group like the Youth Commission is important because LGBT people's voices aren't often heard, and care experienced people's voices often aren't heard, and when those two identities intersect, there can be a lot of stigma and a lot of silencing and discrimination.
It's bridging the gap between care experienced people and LGBT people, so it's giving people with both experiences the opportunity to have their voice heard.
Specifically with LGBT care experienced people, like not a lot of research had been done or not a lot of systems are in place to specifically safeguard LGBT people in care.
Basically, we're just trying to make a difference to young people's lives in care and improve it.
The LGBT Care Experience Youth Commission carried out research to gather the views of young people in care.
We put out a survey monkey with all different questions relating to LGBT people's experience in care, what the difference would be with how they were treated based on their LGBT identity. A lot of people had kind of rough situations and stuff that wasn't good for them, so that still shows that there's a need for this research and action to happen.
Once it was over, we gathered all of the information again and compiled it to make statistics.
Out of the people that we asked, around half of them had come out in a care setting. Of those, 31% said that their experience of coming out in care was negative. 78% of people said they felt that staff and carers didn't have the knowledge to support them. There was also an issue with privacy, where only 39% of respondents said they had control over who knew about their LGBT identity. Nearly half of those asked said they had experienced homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia. Of those who had, 62% didn't report it, with only 29% saying that they would feel comfortable talking about it. 43% of respondents said that they had experienced stigma, prejudice, or discrimination in relation to their LGBT identity in a care setting.
The research is important because LGBT young people in care often don't have much of a voice or feel like they're not safe to be themselves, and in doing this research we've been able to identify and start tackling some of those problems in order to change things for people in the care system now and in the future. The key asks were created after we compiled the results of our research and identified what we thought were the major themes in the answers and what could be done about them.
The LGBT Youth Scotland Care Experienced Youth Commission's key asks are
training staff and carers on LGBT issues, creating a safe environment for young LGBT people, not sharing information without consent from the young person, to build some positive relationships and take homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying seriously, and realise that making jokes about LGBT people is never okay, even just as banter. The most important key ask to me would be the making jokes about LGBT people is never okay, even just as banter, as I've had a lot of that, and sometimes people don't realise that it's not funny and can take it too far at times.
I think the one that's most important to me is training staff and carers in LGBT issues, because our research showed that 78% of participants didn't feel comfortable or safe exploring their LGBT identity.
it's young people's right to have privacy, and it's something which is, in my experience, just not respected in a care setting. You know, like an LGBT identity is not something that needs to be shared around without consent.
I would hope that the key asks would lead to more awareness of LGBT identities in care, as well as hoping that it would improve care services for LGBT young people.
I'm hoping that these key asks will have a positive impact, because the things we've asked for aren't too difficult, and it's just mainly little things that if it's done right and put into practice well, then it should make a massive difference to young LGBT people.
If people know that, you know, that these are issues which are being faced and issues which LGBT young people specifically have said, this is important, this is what needs to change, and you know, will be more aware that that's what needs to happen.
Mainly staff and carers in the care sector should see the film, as well as anyone who's interested or wants to change what's happening currently.
It's good for young people to see it, because then they know that we're actually trying to make a difference and we've been working hard to do something. But at the same time, it's also very important for like carers and parents and professionals to see this and know that like some things aren't okay and some things do have to change for the better.
If they see this video and become aware that that there are people who want this change, then they'll know, oh, actually, maybe I should be changing something. It's easier to petition for change and easier for people to understand and listen if there is concrete information about what needs to change.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Well, I hope that you found that as powerful and striking as I did, and I hope you can take some of their asks back to your own organizations. They've also produced a top tips document, which will be emailed out following the webinar. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function. And if you want any more information on their research or just to continue this conversation, you can get in touch with Sarah Anderson at sarah.anderson@lgbtyouth.org.uk. And so our thanks and gratitude go to LGBT Youth Scotland and their commissioners for the extraordinary work they've done on this topic. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Celeste. It was really good to hear the voice of care-experienced LGBT people in this webinar today. So moving on now to Doreen Watson. Thank you, Doreen.
Hi there, thanks for inviting me to speak today, Jackie, and follow that powerful presentation at your peril. So, as the slide says, my name is Doreen Watson. I'm a service manager within the Care Inspectorate with responsibility for early learning and childcare services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ELC services and our new quality framework, with a little focus on equality and diversity and what we can do within ELC to promote inclusion. Next slide, please. So this is me, cute as a button, many years ago. And for those of you that are used to having your life on social media, this is a very rare photograph of me. Standing next to me in the picture is actually my twin brother, but I didn't include a photograph of him. I didn't want the consent issues. But why is this relevant? Why is About Me relevant to a story about inclusion and diversity? So I think for me it's really relevant because our experiences, the journey where we came from and where we go to, influences how we respond and behave in certain situations. It influences how we might react to individuals that we might come across in our day-to-day work in the care service. So I'm pretty forgetful. I'm getting a bit older and I can forget lots of things. I might not remember what I did last week, but I certainly remember how it felt to be a child. I remember how it felt to be spoken to in certain ways, things that didn't feel just or right or equal to me, although as a child you didn't always understand what was going on. And I remember feeling quite powerless sometimes in certain situations. Discrimination for me existed around my family's socioeconomic situation. And also around my gender. Of course, I didn't understand about gender stereotyping, but I had a front seat experience having a twin, having a male twin brother, and the treatment and expectations of him were completely different because of that situation. I didn't understand as well why expectations for some children were different, higher, because they lived in a private housing scheme and I lived in a council housing estate. It just didn't feel quite right to me. So I've sort of taken that through my career and used it to influence first how I've provided care when I've worked in nurseries. And now in the Care Inspectorate, through inspection, raising awareness, and through our methodology and so forth. And get the opportunity to talk with colleagues from Scottish Government quite often, and we take our story with us. So I think it's important to remember the people using your service are experts in their experience, and we must be really mindful of that. Next slide, please. So a little bit about early learning and childcare. So the stats, we have around about 3,500 early learning and childcare services, and that's your day nurseries, school nurseries, all different connotations of that, and a little over 4,200 childminding services, which change quite often in terms of the numbers for these. There is approximately 250,000 children who are attending any of these services. So the reach that we can have and the impact on families when we positively influence care is so important. And as Jackie said earlier in her presentation, 2021, Year of the Child, UNCR has been enshrined in law. It really is a time to recognise and celebrate the importance of children and families and the role that ELC plays. And I think it's fair to say the work that ELC have been doing through the pandemic, the impact on children through the pandemic, we're going to see that as we move on. So it's so important that we support the sector and support people using services to have the best quality of experience. So one of the ways we do these sorts of things is through our methodology, our inspection methodology, and we've just launched our new quality framework for early learning and childcare and out of school care. We're not inspecting against it now, so you don't need to worry about that. It's just out there to get familiar with. We will be testing it before we launch it for any inspection methodologies. But I just wanted, sorry, next slide, please, Patricia. So I just wanted to say a little bit about, what within the quality framework is going to promote equality and diversity. Well, the framework itself is written from a rights-based approach. Throughout the document, the language that's used comes from a rights-based perspective. It uses the language of the health and social care standards, and also we include reference quite directly to the health and social care standards within the toolkit, within the sections, and also there's links to various good practice to help support services, to help you think about what can I do differently for inclusion, for example. So it recognises the need to be supportive and non-judgmental in the relationships we have with families, and it highlights the need to train staff so that they understand and can promote reflection and review and development. So there's some questions within the section that gives you an opportunity with your staff to talk, to ask questions. How do we know we do this? Because we all think we do things. We don't ever intentionally discriminate, but perhaps there are things about our practice that may unintentionally lead to, discrimination. If you think about my first slide that said all about me, and those of us that work in childcare are very used to that phrase, whether we still use it or not now. It's the way we collect information about our families. And it may be that the way that this is set out, you might unintentionally be making a family feel excluded. They may have a different family dynamic. The people that are important to that child might be very diverse from what the heteronormative view might be. So it's really important that if that has happened unintentionally, work with the families, find out what's important to them, adapt your forms. It's going to help that family, help that child recognise their family within your service, and it's going to help the families that come after. So think about that in your resources as well. Are we representing different groups in family lives, or are we just promoting a stereotype of what the traditional family should look like? So there's lots of ways that you can think about it, and we don't expect to get it right all the time. Next slide. But we do expect reflection. So this is a few relevant areas. I just wanted to emphasise the points I've already made about the framework in terms of diversity. So front and foremost there it says diversity is valued and discrimination is challenged. The rights of children and families are respected and promoted, and all families are treated with dignity and respect, and their human rights are upheld. A really key one, and ELC staff are so good at this, staff warmth and kindness and compassion enables children to feel valued, loved and secure. And that is so important, whatever age group of children you're working with, but equally it's so important that the families feel their child is secure, they trust you, and if they trust you, they will talk to you about what is important to them and their families. Leaders act as role models for the development of nurturing relationships, and I just want to say a little bit about that. It's so important the role leaders play in any service. You can include really great policies. You can talk to your staff about what they should be doing about diversity and inclusion, but if the behaviour they see from their leaders does not support and isn't in line with that, then the actions you'll get from staff will mirror the leader's behaviour. So we absolutely want role models to embrace this and be the best role model, there you go, I've just said it twice in one sentence, never mind. So these quality indicators are across, there's family engagement, leadership management resources, staff skills and knowledge, and I've just popped on one of the many health and social care standards that would support diversity and inclusion. I'm accepted and valued whatever my needs, ability, gender, age, faith, mental health, race, background or sexual orientation. So just to say a safe and welcoming ethos is so important in services. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to make a brief reference to the Gender Equal Play resource that we have. It's an improvement resource that was produced jointly with Zero Tolerance in collaboration with partners such as Play Scotland and Education Scotland, promotes gender equality and how children experience early learning and childcare, and gives people in ELC practical tips, what they can do, how to avoid gender stereotyping. So we make reference to this in our new quality framework, alongside a number of other resources that you can choose from, and they're all available on our hub with various links. So time permitting, Jackie, give me a nod if I've got time. Okay, so I just want to end with a little personal reflection that I'm going to share with you, if that's okay. And it just highlights how even with the best of intentions we can get things a bit wrong. So there is always room to learn. And that's something that I'm constantly evaluating and thinking about assumptions that I make in life, and does that get in my way sometimes? So in the pictures on the screen in front of you, the two little lads there are from the Gender Equal Play resource, but the larger of the pictures is actually my son. And this is him enjoying some dressing up playtime at his granny's house many years ago. And so as a childcare professional, for a number of years now, but I'm looking back probably about 10 years now, I always wanted my children to be who they wanted to be loved, to be valued, to be included, to share with me what they needed to share with me. And imagine when I started to experience indications from my child that he might be gay. Now, I'm very aware of the need to allow people to come out in their own time, respect their privacy, And just to reassure you, I have asked my son's permission to share this wee story. So I thought, so I should just let him tell me when he's ready to tell me, but I'm his mum and my nose was bothering me, let's be really honest. So I started a not so subtle conversation with him about, you know, how he was feeling, and it was okay and it was all right. And it was designed to help him, or so I thought, come out and feel secure. And imagine my complete affront when my son looked at me. He used this tone, he said, "Mother," and he had to be here to hear that tone. "Mother, really sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not gay." And I've absolutely never lived that down. He's has a very diverse range of friends, which I think is so special and important in young people. They're much more open, perhaps, than I think my generation can be sometimes. So I share it with you not to point fun at him at all. It's about me and the assumptions that I was making, and about the importance that we should listen to what people are telling us. If there's something we need to know for the care of the children, then we should ask it appropriately, but we shouldn't make assumptions. We should listen to what people are telling us. And as I say, every day is a learning day, and today has been a real learning experience for me, listening to the other presenters, and I found it really helpful. So thank you for listening to me, and that's me finished. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Doreen. Okay, we're moving on now to Alan and the work of the LGBT Charter Champion Group.
Thanks, Jackie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Barker. I'm an inspector for adults and older people, and I'm the co-chair of the LGBT Charter Champion Group. I'm going to speak a bit more about the group and what we do. Next slide, please, Patricia. Well, there you are, a gnome. We're in the middle of Pride season, and it's usually a time for celebrating, for partying, and for everything else. But we shouldn't forget why Pride events started and the reason it was important to ensure human rights were supported and to ensure equality and diversity inclusion is promoted at all times. Next slide, please, Patricia. So here's a reality check, some facts and figures. And the next few slides kind of cover some research by various organisations. This one's by the Equality Network in 2015, which said 97% of all LGBT people in Scotland have personally faced prejudice or discrimination of some sort. Next slide, please, Patricia. The next one is 71% of LGBT young people have experienced bullying in schools. 1/3 of LGBT young people have said they experienced hate crime. Next slide, please. 60% of older gay people are not confident that social care and support services will be able to understand and meet their needs. Next slide, please. And this is from the Government Equalities Office report a couple of years ago, in which said that more than 2/3 of LGBT respondents said they avoided holding hands with same-sex partners for fear of negative reactions, and at least 2 in 5 respondents had experienced an incident where they were LGBT but had been verbally harassed or there was physical violence. Next slide, please. So they're quite scary facts and figures, but as Stacey was saying, I think there's better awareness now, and certainly understanding is improving, and equality, diversity, and inclusion is certainly back on the agenda again, which is great to see. Just a wee bit about the group. We were founded in 2015 to support the Care Inspectorate to be an inclusive employer and to develop policies and procedures to ensure workforce practice supported equality, diversity, inclusion. And the group is made up of a representation of staff across the organisation who are really passionate about supporting equality, diversity, inclusion. We work with a number of organisations, including LGBT Youth Scotland, LGBT Health and Wellbeing, and spent a lot of time working with Stacey with the development of the toolkit, which was great, and Stonewall Scotland, to name but a few. And we've also done work with Illuminate and National Theatre for Scotland and initiatives as well. So all in all, it's not too bad news. Next slide, please. The group is part of the the corporate equality group, and helps deliver action plan of the Care Inspectorate's quality outcomes and mainstreaming reports that specifically relate to LGBT equality issues, and creates opportunities to promote and encourage inclusive workplace practice. Next slide, please. So what do? We work to ensure that the LGBT community, with the community, to ensure that we are accessible and that people have the opportunity to get involved and influence our work by telling us about their care experiences. And for example, we looked at our training and brought in specific training on LGBT equality issues, other ideas and suggestions that have been taken on board. We've collaborated externally with equality organisations to promote LGBT awareness, and we work to increase our visibility and being more explicit about being inclusive as an organisation, to have that wider understanding about the values within and out with the workforce, such as Pride events. Next slide, please. More importantly, we want our staff to have the knowledge and understanding and skills to have improvement discussions within the workplace, so we are actively promote and live by the Care Inspectorate's values and principles. Promoting these values when we do our regulated work also supports and encourages care service providers to improve their awareness and understanding of LGBT issues for people using the service. As an organisation, we must work towards the elimination of unlawful LGBT discrimination, harassment and victimisation, and identify a way to address such inequalities. Next slide, please. Our achievements. Well, we got the group up and running, and we're here for a virtual Pride. What an achievement that is. But in 2018, we were awarded the LGBT Scotland Foundation Charter Award, which is something that we were all very proud of as a group and as an organisation. And we were the first regulator in Scotland to achieve this. But we didn't want the award to sit on the mantelpiece and gather dust. It had to do something with meaningful purpose and to make improvements and to enable change. And that's where the Charter Group and the Qualities Group come into force. I'll cover that in a minute. Next slide, please. Achievements. The Care Inspectorate has been working with LGBT organisations, developing practice guides, networking with similar organisations, and we've listened to people during our Pride events and developed our workforce training opportunities and materials. We've updated our hub information to ensure equality, diversity and inclusion is up there. We also have an internet LGBT page as an organisation for staff, and a Yammer LGBT and equality group page as well. We've also been involved, as I said before, with Stacey, with LGBT health and wellbeing, with the Proud to Care toolkit, and we've held community discussions with LGBT organisations as well. We're presently working with a number of organisations, including the Stonewall Scotland Diversity Champion Programme. And last year we were nominated for the Proud Scotland nomination award. This year we're holding a virtual Pride event, which is really exciting and a first for the Care Inspectorate. We also continue to develop LGBT materials in line with best practice. Next slide, please. Well, talking about Pride, the next few slides are of our events and being at the Pride event. Some really good comments from the public as well. I think the most important one was very much, we can't thank you enough for your work that you're doing here. We're often ignored as a community, and glad you have put LGBT on the map. And that meant an awful lot to us. It meant that we were doing the right thing and we were listening to people. And from that, we've developed our LGBT materials, etc. Next slide, please. We started very basic and we're getting better. This is our early days, and From our first event, I think 2016, we finished up producing an LGBT information leaflet from that. So we're continually learning and getting ideas from the community. Next slide, please. This is one of our events in Dundee as well. Next one, please. This is from Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow as well. And we know what the Queen has in her handbag. It's care inspectorate, lip salve, pencils and pens. Next slide, please. Again, this is some of the facts and figures that I've covered already, but it's good as a reminder. Next slide, please. Hopes and fears. I think what was coming through very much through the discussions, and it's kind of similar theme from what Celeste and Stacey was saying as well, is there has been discussions with the public about fear of accessing care services due to the potential of perceived harassment, bullying, victimisation, and a lack of understanding by care staff, a lack of understanding and training of care staff, and a lack of understanding of identity and culture. Next slide, please. The hopes, and this is again from feedback from the Pride events, for the care inspector to be more informed of LGBT issues, for the care inspector to promote best practice, to create conversations with providers and colleagues, and to promote equality, diversity and inclusion. Another one was very much to encourage care services to think about equality, diversity and inclusion, and to make care person-centred. And these hopes and fears directly link to our corporate plan to bring about improvement. Next slide, please. So, all in all, over the past 10 events I think we've spoken to over 2,500 people at the various Pride events. We've attended community events and promoted and introduced people to the human rights-based health and social care standards. We've given out hundreds and hundreds and had some fantastic conversations of people who weren't aware who we were and who weren't aware of the health and social care standards. But it's created opportunities for people to be more familiar with our regulatory work, and as a workforce for us to be more focused on protected characteristics. We continue to work with LGBT community and stakeholders. Next slide, please. We all know that from research and from feedback from people that accessing a care service can be traumatic at any time, and more so for the LGBT community. Conversations about equality, diversity, inclusion can aid that discussion and understanding and ultimately provide a more positive care experience. We need consistency and continuity in our approach, and we need the workforce to embrace the values and principles of the organisation, which would certainly strengthen and solidify our values. We can make a difference, and that's why we're having a Pride in Care virtual week. Next slide, please. This is some of the posters that are available, and hopefully we might have them on our website as well. You can contact us through any means through the Care Inspectorate or through our specific lgbt.charter@careinspectorate.gov email .gov.scot email address. Next slide, please. So these are some of the pictures from our various prides. It is fun, it's hard work, but I think what rewards us is the actual conversations. Next slide, please. These are some of the people who we've spoken with, who have helped us and who are allies. Next slide, please. So that's it. If you hear any good examples of inclusive practice out there, tell us. But equally, if you hear any not so good discriminatory practice, we want to hear that as well. You can contact us at lgbt.charter@careinspectorate.gov.scot or inquiries@careinspectorate.gov.scot. We can all make a difference and create that conversation about inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thanks to all our speakers today. I allowed the speakers a little extra time because we didn't have a huge amount of questions. It was more about comments in the Q&A, but good to see that people recognised that the toolkit that Stacey spoke about was being emphasised through Aberdeen City Health and Social Care Partnerships mainstreaming report, and that the Gender Equal Play resource is being recognised as good practice as well. So just really final thoughts from me in terms of, I hope you found it a really interesting and use of your time today. I certainly have a lot to reflect on and found it very helpful. And just to encourage you to sign up to the conversation cafes if you haven't done it already. Steve has posted that in the Q&A. And just thanks to the speakers and everyone for your time today and for making the event possible. I do hope you found it helpful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.